We're in a three-part series called Elephants in the Room in Revitalization. If you go back 2 episodes, Mark Clifton and I talked about the issue of my spouse is ready to leave the church, but I'm not. Man, that was a good one. And it was so good, Mark continued to add a few points in part 2, Elephants in the Room, because after we got through recording, he said, I wish I'd said this. I said, well, Mark, we're doing a series. We can do an addendum. So the end of part 1 can be found in part 2. And then we get to the issue of my denomination or my network or other churches does not support my church. And now we're in the whole issue of I overestimated my leadership ability, but I am afraid to admit it. Someone who gets into a situation of a replant or revitalization, it could be for any leadership situation. We're specifically applying it to that one. Now, Mark, in the first episode, by the way,
yes,
pre-recording, you were telling us that you are now in your house that you had built one level for old people.
Yeah.
I have a one level house, so I fully appreciate that. 2, Jill gave you the opportunity to the decor just the way you want it.
In the smallest room in the house. That's my room, so I got it.
That's quite all right. Describe to our viewing audience, the YouTubers are going to see it. Our listening audience is going to need to hear it described. What do you got in there?
Everything in here is from about 1965 to 1975. Everything. The clocks, the furniture, everything. I love my rotary dial phone. I got a bright orange rotary dial phone. It's a real phone. I mean, it's not a remake. I've got my Jetson figures because that was my favorite cartoon.
Yes.
I have the I have the Polaroid Swinger camera. Check that out.
Oh, and I sang that song when it was not being recorded.
That's cool. And Amy has no idea what that is. So I have that. I have my cool sunburst clock over here. See that? Can you see that? Did you ever those? We always had one of those in my living room.
Yeah. I saw it even before.
Yeah. And I got my little. This is a brand new old stock. Excuse me, brand new old whatever. It's a brand new old transistor radio. In other words, it had never been out of the box. I got it at an auction. And so it's brand new, but it's original. That makes sense? Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? That was the iPod in my day right there. So, and I won't show you the rest of it. I got a lava lamp. Dude, it's 1971 when I come in here. So, it's a great way to be.
Hey, all I got over my right shoulder are grandkids and granddogs.
There you go. All right. Now that people who don't watch YouTube they're going to have to get on YouTube and see all this wonderful stuff. That's right.
Yeah, that's one of the fun parts about viewing it. We know that a lot of people are traveling and are running or doing something when they listen to our podcast, and so viewing is not an option. But we are at YouTube as well. So, Mark, how many digits was your first phone number that you recall at your home?
Mine was the same. It was 461-8019. Now somebody will call that, but I didn't give you the area code. So that was mine. We had the regular one. Yeah.
You had my first one was 4 digits.
Was it really?
Yeah, 2108.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Eventually, I guess the county grew where we had to add a 5th digit, and it became 82108.
Although I guess it was 252 was enough. It wasn't 252. That was my first phone number would have been 252-9071. It wasn't 252. It was, and because my name was Clifton, I thought it was really cool. It was Clifton 2 9071. You remember back in the day when they would have a word? You remember that?
Yeah,
remember that.
Like Republic was mine. RE.
Yeah. And so rather than 3 digits, it would be. That was strange. Whatever. But it used to be that way. You dial Clark 1-6831. It's like, that was what they used to say. Aren't you excited about this, Amy? Isn't just reached a whole new level?
4 minutes into the podcast, and we've seen the 60s and 70s decor, and we've talked about telephone numbers. We're really helping our listening and viewing audience.
I think we peaked out.
Mark, I think I peaked out 20 years ago. All right, part 3. Just a reminder again, we're in a 3-part series on elephants in the room and revitalization. This is part 3. Again, the topic is I overestimated my leadership ability, but I am afraid to admit it. Mark, in the first one, I asked you what was the frequency that you heard, my spouse is ready to leave the church, but I'm not. You said almost weekly. I did not ask you about my denomination does not support our church, the frequency you hear that. How about this one? Do you ever hear from people who say, I thought I was smart enough and had all the skills to lead this church, but I don't, and I'm afraid to tell my church? Is it is it rare, or do you hear that from time to time?
Here's what I know. It's a common occurrence, but I don't hear about it much. They don't acknowledge it much.
It's
It's
a
it,
true elephant in the room then.
it's a true elephant in the room because I know it and they know it and they may know I know it, but they don't talk about it. And that makes it an elephant in the room. They're much more likely to say, hey, my spouse is really having some struggles here. How do I deal with this? Or, hey, how come I'm not getting support from other churches and that kind of thing? Very seldom does a guy come to me and a leader and say, "Look, hey man, I'm out over my skis on this one. You know, I've bitten off more here than I can chew." I just think it's just hard for us from a human pride standpoint, maybe, to acknowledge that. And but yet, I can look at the situation and I can see that that's exactly what's happened. Sometimes you go to a place and it begins to grow. Well, it all of a sudden you got to grow with it as a leader, right? I mean, you absolutely have to grow with it as a leader. And some guys don't want to grow as a leader. They don't know how to grow as a leader. They've never grown as a leader. And so it's common, but it's not talked about very much.
Well, I guess we're ending the elephants in the room with the truest elephant in the room, because the very definition of elephant in the room, it's there, but you don't talk about it. The other two, they may be acknowledging the elephant just a little bit more. Uh, Here's the first point. I often tell this. We have a lot of strong relationships at Church Answers. There's a lot of trust. There's a trust between us and the pastors and other church leaders. There's a trust among the church leaders. And if we ever feel like someone's being snarky or violating a trust, we're just not going to let them stay in the community. And on, I'll say multiple occasions, and I'll say maybe a dozen times since I've been at Church Answers, I've heard a pastor, and these were all pastors in this particular situation, say, I cannot lead this church, and I want to let my church know that. And I say, time out just a minute. Let's think about how you're going to communicate this. Let's think about process. Let's think about, okay, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your transparency, but let's talk about how you're going to communicate this. And let's talk about, is there something you can do before you communicate it? Confession is good, but this is almost true for anything where we find ourselves in a frail situation. Be wise about how you're confessing it and to whom you're confessing it.
And I think sometimes people don't even. There's a lack of reality that this is my problem. I'm not sure how to word that, Dr. Rayner, but maybe it's just a lack of emotional intelligence or something like that. But they don't even understand that I'm the one holding this situation back. But then sometimes, as you said, when they realize I am the one, that this thing has really outgrown my leadership ability, then you feel vulnerable. Like if I talk to someone about it, what's that say about me? And how am I supposed to move beyond this? And how do I get out of this situation I'm in? And so sometimes they don't talk to anybody about it, and it just gets worse. And if you don't deal with it, it's not going to get better absolutely on its own. It's just going to continue to get worse. And so at some point, like you said, you have to confess it to somebody, right? You got to tell somebody, but you got to be careful who you tell. You don't necessarily go to your chairman of trustees or the chairman of the board of your church and go, I'm not up to this job. That's probably not
Not a good first step.
Probably not a good first step. But at some point, first, I guess, here's what I'm trying to say. You got to confess it to yourself first. You got to accept it to yourself. And then you got to find someone you trust that you can share that with. You do those two things, you're going to be well on your way to solving this issue. But if you don't do either one of those, you're not. And if you sort of just out of desperation tell one of your main church leaders, man, I don't think I'm up to this, it's real hard to walk those words back later on.
Secondly, make certain you are certain about your own shortfalls, particularly as a leader. The longer I live, the longer I'm in leadership roles, the longer my list gets of my own shortfalls. And what that means is I was not self aware for good parts of my life for some of these shortfalls. And there are probably, likely, some shortfalls in my leadership that I'm not aware right now that I hope I will be at times. Let me tell you some of my shortfalls in leadership. It's a long list. This is not Confessions of Thom in part 3 of Elephants in the Room and Revitalization. One of the shortfalls is I am terrible at granular situations. If you give me something that has a lot of pieces and parts to it, I'm going to lose the pieces and the parts. And so I am not good at that. Here's another one, Mark. I say things that come out of my mouth intending one way, but they come out blunt and rough to people. And I've had people tell me that. And I don't know if I've corrected. Here's the thing about it. I don't know if I've corrected either one of those at this point. I'm just aware that I have them.
That's such a good point, Dr. Rayner. How do you become self-aware? I mean, how do we put ourselves in a position where people can actually feed back into us and give us honest feedback? I think some guys leaders have probably never had that level of honest feedback. And I think in my own experience, when I was younger, I was far more defensive about it than I am now that I'm older. Too. That maybe that's different for different people. But
Well,
how do you become aware of your own shortfalls? That answer that that's a good question, isn't it?
I hope that I have 4 men in my life that speak into me with truth. They say they do. 3 of them happen to be my sons, and they're not going to let me get away with anything. They love me to death, but they are going to be very upfront about in conversations when Dad, that was just stupid. And they'll just let me know. And then in our organization, Brad Wagner,
Uh-huh.
he's been my number 2 man in more than one organization. And his most common line to me is, Rainer, that's stupid. That's
Yeah.
just really stupid. And so he does it out of concern and love. I have been fortunate in the last couple of decades of my life to have those kind of people, but I still have to think that there are some issues in my life which I don't have self awareness. I like to take emotional intelligence tests. I usually fail them, but I like to take them to find out where I am. But those were just 2 issues that I've learned of many throughout my leadership life.
It would be interesting. Maybe we could do a podcast on how I can judge my own leadership ability and that
Ooh,
kind of thing. Because I
I
think
wonder if
most of
someone's
us,
writing how I
yeah,
can.
I don't think most of us really know how to do that. I really don't. A lot of times, after church on Sunday, people line up and tell you, "Oh, it was a great sermon. It was a wonderful sermon," even though if it wasn't. They tell you that anyway sometimes. Or sometimes they tell you it was a bad sermon and actually it was a good one. So it's hard to get that kind of feedback. And again, even in a church situation, especially in a revitalization situation, there's so many hurdles. There's so many peaks and valleys. It's so hard to know, am I really doing this right? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Do I have the right tactical patience? Am I really a visionary shepherd? Am I moving ahead of the people too far? How am I bringing up? Am I doing a good job at this? Now, if you never ask yourself those questions, you got a problem. I mean, if you just assume you're doing a great job, that's probably a problem. But how do you get some honest feedback? That'd be a really good podcast to have,
You
because I
know,
think some of us really struggle with that.
are there some telltale signs that you might not be? Let's say that you are a leader, and your pattern is always criticizing another leader or other leaders.
Okay.
That that would be one indicator that you may not be self-aware because you're busy. Say you had a predecessor and you're spending most of your energy criticizing the predecessor instead of moving the organization forward. That would be one of those. There's certain signs or indicators that can tell us we may not be, that may point us to what we should be doing.
And maybe we have a few strengths in our life and we spend all of our time on those strengths, ignoring some of the other things the church needs. But since we're not good at that, we don't really deal with it. And then it becomes pretty obvious that there's some real weaknesses here that we're not dealing with because we don't know how to do that. We're not comfortable doing that. But hey, I'm really good at these things over here. Maybe I'm really good at preparing sermons and preaching, but I'm not very good at developing leaders and disciples. I'm not very, very good at dealing with conflict. So I don't do that. But I'm really good at maybe dealing with youth. I'm really good maybe at other things. And if you see there's a not a balance in that, that's probably a good indication as well.
I like it. I like it. We're doing a three-part series, Mark Clifton and I, on elephants in the room and revitalization. Part one was my spouse is ready to leave the church, but I'm not. Go back and listen or watch that one, and please continue listening to it as we continue the topic in part two. And finally, got to my denomination does not support our church as elephants in the room, and we're finishing up with this part three. I overestimated my leadership ability. We talked about confession. We talked about trying to find out your own shortfalls. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you may be in the wrong seat on the bus. It may be that you belong in the organization, but it'd be good for you to move somewhere within the organization.
Back in the 80s and even 90s, I was a church planter. And I was really good at making a mess. We used to put on a whiteboard and say, I would just, there was nothing on the whiteboard. And then I just draw a bunch of squiggly lines and say, that's my ministry. I just get something together, right? I out of nothing, God gives me this sort of ability to kind of gather something together. And that might take, in my life, it might take a year or three, something along that. But part of that gathering together was me looking for the founding pastor, all right? And that founding pastor would come along and he would take that mess of lines and he would put them in some order so that they had a form and a shape, if that makes any sense what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so I knew in those days, I knew that my gift set was limited to sort of that initiation phase. I was not the founding pastor phase that would be there for 10 or 12 or 15 years. That could go through several levels of, I was the one that would gather. And that was a real freeing experience for me to play to my strengths in that and not try to do something that I wasn't really called to do. However, at the age of about 50, God brought me to Warnell Road, and I thought I'll do the same thing. That little church had no people left, 18 folks, and so, I'll just gather some folks, and I'll go find a founding pastor here for Warnell Road, replant it. Well, God made it really clear to my wife and I that you are to stay here. And I'd never stayed at a church longer than 3 years in my life. Not that it wasn't because I got fired. It's just because, like I said, I was the initiator. And that was a really learning experience for me because I realized if I'm going to stay here, I don't have the gift sets to do this, Dr. Rayner. I don't have the gift sets to bring organization and structure that helps this thing grow and develop. And so I had to find other men that would come around me and fill that gap and hold me accountable. And then I really had to become less and they became more. So even though I was still the lead pastor, I shared leadership very much so with other people who really took on roles that I couldn't do. And in that regard, we were able to continue to grow and do things. But if it all related just to me, it would have maxed out at about 26 people. That would have been that would have been the top.
I hope you don't mind me sharing a conversation you and I had about a week ago where we were talking about we both have similarities that we like to pivot.
Yes.
We like to offer new ideas.
Yes.
And organization, let's do that and that. And we have found that when we say those things, the very speaking of them or writing of them sends our organization into tailspin.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happens. I wake up. They say I wake up in a new world every day. And one of the leaders at Warnell said, Mark has two ways of doing things: over the top and way over the top. So that's just my world I live in. And so you got to have some people that pull you back in and say, here's what we're going to do. And there are times you need to be that visionary leader, but there are times you need to listen to some other people, right? And a lot of being a good leader is listening to other people you trust.
Which brings up this fourth point: get a trustworthy coach. And hear me well, a coach is not necessarily a formal relationship of paying someone to talk to you. It could be, but it does not have to be. A coach is somebody that can speak truth into you. A coach is someone who can listen to you. A coach is someone who can be your friend, but the type of friend that does not let you get away with anything. And so if you don't have that person in your life, maybe it's time to start seeking that person.
Yes, everyone needs to have that person that can really speak truth into them and just let you bounce things off of them. And so they can help you understand where you are in all of this. The other thing, I want to be really careful here. Sometimes guys emulate other leaders and you don't have the gift set of that other leader. You're not that person. You're not Rick Warren. All right. So don't try to do what Rick Warren tried to do. You got to take what gift set God's given you. And you're right. I love the fact that maybe at some point you realize I've done all my leadership abilities able to do here. I'm not in the right place anymore. and there's no failure in moving on and going someplace where you are. But to the degree you have a coach that can help walk you through that, listen to you, pray with you, give you feedback, that's going to be a much easier decision to make rather than an emotional decision that's maybe made in a time of anger or angst or fear or whatever. You don't want to make that decision in that. You want it to be based really on, where's my leadership skills? What does this church need? Am I really able to do that, or would it be better for someone else to do that? And is there another place I can go that would be better suited for me? I mean, God can do anything he wants in my life, right? I mean, totally. I've never pastored a church of more than 150. I just don't think I have that. I don't have a desire to do it. Actually, Warnell now is larger after I left than when I was there. That doesn't surprise me, because the leader that followed me has far more leadership skills in that regard than I had. And that's fine. And to own who you are is a wonderful thing. But to try to be who you're not damages everybody.
Which brings up this last point. Remember, the elephant in the room here is I overestimated my leadership ability, but I'm afraid to admit it. Mark and I have said this is probably the clearest elephant. Is an elephant. If an elephant is defined as something that everybody knows is there, but no one will recognize it. Let's say you get to the point and you say, I'm not the right fit here. And let's say you're a pastor, don't get in the pulpit the next Sunday and quit.
Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Please. Well, but I've heard people do it.
Oh gosh, I've coached some people who I said, just wait. And with unanimity, they all have regretted later.
Every time.
The decision. Give it. And that's true for a lot of big decisions. Sleep on it. Wait. What is a crisis today can become a minor issue in 3 days. We often don't have that perspective.
Right. Oh, absolutely. That is so true. Good word. Great wisdom.
Well, Mark, thank you for being such a wise, sagacious, that's redundant, person on these three issues of elephants in the room. Once again, if you didn't listen to the first two, part one, my spouse is ready to leave the church, but I'm not. Part two, my denomination does not support me. And then this one, of course, overestimated my leadership ability, but I'm afraid to admit it. Go back and put all three of these together. Quite frankly, I won't speak for this for me, but just listen to Mark Clifton. These three are leadership lessons that you may want to play to a group of leaders, or just to bring him in and listen to this. He's offered a lot of great insights, which he always does. But I think when we get on a theme, Mark, and we follow it through for more than one, it helps sometimes because we're able to dig a lot more deeply.
Yeah, it really does. Those are good. I appreciate it, man. It's been great being with you.
Always. Thank you. Always, audience. Those of you who are watching us on YouTube or listening to us on your favorite podcast app, always let us know that you're there by subscribing or giving a rating and review. We always appreciate it. Thankful to Mark Clifton. Thankful for Amy Jordan in the production area. Thankful for Akeem Abdul-Morella, who is with us as well, working always judiciously to make things come to be.
And we're thankful too. We're thankful too. If you're watching on YouTube, we're thankful for George and Judy Jetson, who are right here looking over my shoulder. So
yes,
you'll have
absolutely.
They have to go to YouTube.
We thank all of them. Continue to come back to Revitalize and Replant, where we're helping churches get healthier together.